All right, everybody. Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Advocate LSU Sports Update. I am football beat writer Wilson Alexander, joined by my colleague, as always, Leah Vann. Leah, how are you doing? I know you are having to fast today. I don't know if that's something you wanted to discuss, but how's that going so far?
Yeah, so if people don't know, today is the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, where we fast for 24 hours and ask for forgiveness for our sins, like walking in late to a press conference. But yeah, I'm hungry, but I've got 4 or 5 hours to go, so we'll take my mind off of it with some football talk. How about that?
That sounds like a great idea. We'll start a lot of discussion today, of course, will be about the LSU passing game. I mean, throwing for 85 yards, including just 5 in the second half against Auburn. We'll also get into later just sort of what LSU needs to do defensively to stop a Tennessee offense that is particularly explosive through the air with quarterback Hendon Hooker. But let's start with the passing game. Go really deep into that. We'll start today with how it shows here why the passing game struggled against Auburn, and then kind of try to get into what LSU's doing to fix it. The issues are complicated. What Brian Kelly said Monday, though, what really emphasized clearly was that quarterback Jaden Daniels needs to be more aggressive, not reckless, but he said, Brian Kelly, we're way too conservative right now. They need to push the ball downfield, get into tighter windows. What stood out to you about Kelly's comments?
Yeah, and I looked up some numbers to kind of back this up. The average depth of target for the receivers that he is looking to is about 5.8 to 6.8 yards, depending on who they're playing. I think the 6.8 was against a worse team, like a Southern team. But yeah, it shows me that Jaden is not really going through all of his progressions, right? He's looking towards the first guys that are out there running those shorter routes. So I think we looked into the numbers, and you were saying today that Mason Taylor is one of the highest targeted receivers right now as a tight end. He is the second most targeted receiver in this offense right now to Malik Neighbors, who we know plays in the slot. So that's telling us that, yes, Jaden Daniels is throwing the ball, but when he does, he throws it very short yardage, which is fine if you have receivers who can make plays. But when you're throwing to a guy like Mason Taylor, who's a true freshman, and he's your tight end, I mean, you probably want to like kind of sit back and throw to a guy like Boutte, who's been targeted 21 times. He's the third most targeted receiver on this team. But yeah, you probably don't want Mason Taylor to be your number 2 targeted receiver on this team.
Yeah, and then that's not. I think that's to be clear. It's not like a dig necessarily at Mason Taylor. I mean, he's a freshman who they're really high on in the future. But right now, like you said, you've got Kayshon Boutte, you've got Malik Neighbors, you've got Jack Bech, you've got Brian Thomas, and it's like you said, you need to get the ball downfield to those guys, and maybe and Mason is kind of like your outlet, your safety blanket underneath. And I actually asked Jaden about that yesterday when we talked to him. Is it a product of Mason running sort of those underneath? He said, yeah, it feels like Mason is, he trying to trust him as a pass catcher, and he's been doing a good job with that. But kind of like you said, it's like there's been so much discussion this year about like his progressions that you mentioned, and there's been times when he's getting through them, but then he's not throwing with anticipation, or he's releasing the ball like a second later than maybe he should. And that's obviously causing this passing game to just get off to a slow start and not be able to. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by our columnist Scott Ravelet walking around behind me here in the office. Anyway, he's got to be able to throw that anticipation. There was a couple plays that stood out to me in the Auburn game where Jaden, they had a guy coming right out of his break. There was one in particular, Brian Thomas, and he just didn't see him right when he was coming out of his break. He's got to throw that ball when he's coming out of that route instead of waiting for him to get open. Of course, though, like we said, this is not a single Jaden Daniels issue. This is not just on the quarterback solely. It rarely is, and in this case, I don't think it is. The receivers were not great against Auburn. 6 drops that I counted: Boutte, Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Emery, Mason Taylor. They all had drops. Why do you think they were maybe necessarily struggling in this game? Was there something maybe with Auburn's really tight coverage, or was there something else that was going on with the receivers that made you think, just in general, like they've got to get better?
It felt like to me they were either out of sync or they weren't expecting to get the ball at some point. Like I felt like there were times that they weren't fully keyed in on the play and or anticipating the fact that they would get the ball. And so I think that's something that's a quarterback and wide receiver relationship issue, because Auburn, I mean, like they had a good front, but their secondary wasn't like second to none. It wasn't good enough to, block out a guy like Boutte. And so to me, it felt like more of an LSU chemistry problem. And you look at guys like Devin Hooker. We're gonna see the Hendon Hooker. Excuse me. Wow. It's the lack of food today. Who LSU is going to play this weekend. I mean, he's averaging about 11.5 yards was where the average depth of target, which I was talking about earlier, something that you can find on Pro Football Focus. So he's finding those receivers deep. He is also he has the opportunity because he goes through those progressions. And then you look at what Jaden Daniels is doing. I mean, his passes are going for about 4 yards per attempt. So, LSU, I think it's all a chemistry issue, but I want to go and look forward to this Tennessee game. Wilson, what can LSU do to fix the passing game against Tennessee?
So let's start with what the players did on Monday. There was a players-only meeting that Jaden Daniels initiated coming off of that Auburn game. It was all the wide receivers, all the quarterbacks, because they all knew that they shared some responsibility in throwing for 85 yards against Auburn. They talked a lot about trust in this meeting. Malik Neighbors said that was primarily the focus, because they knew that the quarterback, Jaden Daniels, needs to trust that when he throws downfield, that they're going to come down with the ball and make contested catches. And they also, on the flip side, those receivers need to trust that he's going to make those throws and make those, attempts into tighter windows, not necessarily into triple coverage. Let's be clear, but like if a guy's got a one-on-one deep, like give him a shot. And because that hasn't been happening, or when it has been happening, they haven't connected for whatever reason. I want to use this quote that Jaden Daniels, told us yesterday. If we want to win, if we want to achieve the goals that we have set, obviously you're going to have to push the ball downfield and make those big plays and make teams respect you deep. And we've got to win our one-on-one matchups. That starts with me giving them a chance, receivers winning the matchup, winning the route, and then we just connect and get into that flow. So I think this, Malik Neighbors said that this could be a really beneficial meeting that they had. Sometimes people make too much of players-only meetings. Sometimes nothing really ever comes out of them. But this was the first time this season that they had done something like this. The receivers and the quarterbacks hadn't just met together by themselves yet this year, but they knew that what they did against Auburn wasn't sustainable. That's not going to work against Tennessee, against Florida, against Ole Miss, against Alabama. And so they started with that meeting to try to get back on the right track, build that trust, so that when they can then start maybe push the ball downfield a little bit more in this game against Tennessee, which may actually be the perfect opponent to play this weekend.
Yes, exactly. So Tennessee has actually one of the worst secondaries in the country. They are literally 128 out of 131. They're allowing over 300 passing yards per game, and they just lost their best cornerback in Warren Burrell. He's out for the season. We'll talk a little bit more offensively later about what Tennessee is missing there. But yeah, so this is the opportunity where LSU can really find its groove in the passing game. And, we'll see how that matches up. It could be a shootout. It could not be, because remember, LSU's defense is quite strong. And I was going to talk about that next.
Yeah. I want to make one more point just about the passing game. This isn't, like we said, Jaden Daniels has to push the ball downfield. He's got to just trust these receivers in those tight situations. I mean, he tried, think back to the Florida State game. He gave Kayshawn a one-on-one in the end zone. Kayshawn, that's usually is a tough catch, but Kayshawn didn't make the catch, and he's got to be able to, the receiver's got to bring down those kinds of balls. So it's all of these guys working together. It's not solely on Jaden Daniels. It's not solely on the receivers. It is very much a combination of things. Brian Kelly even said that, maybe LSU needs to look at the play calling a little bit. Jaden and Mike Denbrock, they talk every week, Jaden said, about the plays. If they have something that Jaden doesn't feel comfortable with, they're not going to run it. But they want to know, in terms of the play calling, that it's something that Jaden feels comfortable with. But Brian Kelly even said that, maybe they need to make some adjustments there, figure out ways to get these guys the ball, maybe be more creative. That's something we've heard now for a few weeks. So we'll see if that starts to happen against Tennessee, which has an incredibly fast-paced offense, an explosive offense, the number one or two scoring offense in the country right now. They're putting up points in a hurry, and maybe they haven't played any great defenses, which I think you're going to talk about here in a second. But this is an offense that's going to be tough to defend. And with LSU's slow starts this year, because they have not been scoring much at all in the first half against Power 5 teams, I think that raises some concerns.
Yeah, and I think the importance of this game is for LSU to start off fast, like they've been saying they're trying to do. But especially on offense, you don't want to get down against a Tennessee, because Tennessee's offense will wear you out, will wear out any defense because it goes so fast. And this LSU defense, doesn't want to be on the field all the time. So, yeah, I think when we come to LSU's defense, LSU's defense is number 19 in total defense in the country, which is pretty substantial, top 20. And as far as scoring, 14.8 points per game allowed. So, but if you look against Power Five teams, the passing yards allowed are up to about 270 instead of like 184. So take that as you will, but it's still going to be the most difficult defense that Tennessee has faced so far this season. Tennessee faced Pittsburgh earlier this year, and Pittsburgh was number 32 in total defense, number 38 in pass defense. So they were the toughest competition, and LSU is quite a bit better than Pittsburgh this year. And the other thing that's working in LSU's favor is that Tennessee's number 2 wide receiver, Cedric Tillman, actually had surgery this week, and we don't know if he's going to play yet or not. But if he's going to play, he's probably not going to be 100%. Now, they still have Jalen Hyatt, their number 1 wide receiver, who has 325 yards receiving so far this year, and his average is about 14.13 yards per catch. So I think LSU does have a better shot than what we are seeing in the rankings.
Interesting that you say that. Yeah, and you wrote a story about this today that LSU. We certainly saw this against Mississippi State in particular, that they were disguising fronts, and whatever they seemed to be doing pre-snap would completely change post-snap. Brian Kelly, though, has said this week that that's not going to be very easy against Tennessee because they move fast. They're often snapping the ball with like 20 seconds left on the play clock. But this also means that Tennessee is not using a lot of exotic sort of formation changes. They're not using a lot of motions and stuff like that. So Brian Kelly said the key this week for LSU defensively is that it's going to come down to one-on-one matchups. LSU has got to win its one-on-one. So we're going to learn a lot about LSU's cornerbacks. Mekhi Garner, Jark Bernard-Converse, depending on whether or not he plays corner or safety. Even if he's playing safety, you're going to have to cover one-on-one at times. Greg Brooks, Colby Richardson, this whole secondary is going to really be tested. Jay Ward, too, at nickel for vertically for the first time this season. We saw LSU against Auburn, give up a lot of big chunk plays in the first half. There was communication issues in particular. It got better, actually, once they put Jark Bernard-Converse at safety and took Joe Fouché out of the game. Joe was playing his first game, of course, since the 4-game academic suspension ended. But it's going to be really interesting to see what Tennessee, how those one-on-one matchups go. Like, you got to win your one-on-ones at the line of scrimmage as well. What do you maybe expect to see out of LSU defensively to try to, match up against that Tennessee offense and what they do schematically?
Yeah, so again, we're not going to see those disguises that we have been seeing in all these previous games, where they'll start off kind of giving a zone look and then go man to man. Here it's going to be, what you're seeing is what you're going to get with their scheme. They're probably going to play a lot of zone coverage. Zone blitzing is something that has worked really well in LSU's favor, putting some pressure on the quarterback and then bailing into coverage. And then all of a sudden you've got 10 guys out there covering on wide receivers and the quarterback has no one to pass to. But the goal here to slow down Tennessee is to get them to 3rd and long. That is ultimate goal, because then they have to change personnel. They only have a certain number of plays that they run on 3rd and long, and that takes time. So then LSU can actually disguise a defensive play, and they can do what they've been doing against a Mississippi State, against an Auburn. They have the time to really play with the quarterback's head and get into some mind games. I think I spoke to Brandon Taylor yesterday. It's like a chess match, because the offense is trying to guess what defensive look he's getting, and then the defense is trying to guess what offensive look they're going to get. But the majority of the time, LSU knows what they're going to get out of Tennessee. And so if they get into the 3rd and long situation, that's 5 yards or longer, then they're going to be able to slow this offense down.
I guess we'll see if it can happen. It's not going to be easy necessarily. Like you said, Tennessee has not played a defense quite like LSU's this year, but at the same time, it is not faced in LSU is not facing offense quite like Tennessee's this year. So I think we're just going to learn a lot in this game. This is, Brian Kelly said earlier this week that LSU has kind of gotten by on heart and determination. That's nothing to turn your nose up at. I mean, the fact that LSU had 2 second-half comebacks against Mississippi State and Auburn, one of those being on the road, like you're 4-1 right now, and you're 2 on the SEC, and that's not a bad place to be in the year one under a head coach. But now you got the hard test. A ranked Tennessee team, first ranked team you're playing of the year, at Florida, and then a currently ranked, and will probably be ranked at the time, Ole Miss team, obviously bye, and then number 1 Alabama. So we're going to start to learn a lot about this LSU team. This is a pivotal stretch, probably most difficult point of the schedule coming up here. And it starts this weekend. And, the ability, like you said, to be able to force Tennessee into 3rd and longs, to see if they can clamp down on this passing offense. And on the flip side, if LSU can begin to develop more of a dynamic aerial threat, because LSU's been running the ball better. Actually, I think Brian Kelly said 6 yards a carry in the second half over the last 3 games. He said SEC games, but they've only played 2, so that doesn't quite make much sense. And they need to get more, but they can't be one-dimensional. So we'll see what happens. I mean, before we go, 11 a.m. kickoff in Tiger Stadium. What are your thoughts? Everybody's, talking about this. It's a sellout. Actually, and it's also the first game between LSU and Tennessee in Tiger Stadium since 2010. We'll have more on that later this week. That wild game with what you thought was a botched snap. Tennessee's got too many men on the field. Crazy ending. What sort of atmosphere do you expect to see on Saturday morning?
I expect to see a lot of coffee. At least I would. But coffee in one hand, beer in the other, I guess is what they're going to do, or they're going to skip the coffee. But yeah, I mean, being from Texas, I'm used to 11 a.m. kickoffs, y'all. Like Texas OU every year is at 11 a.m. And then I covered a little bit of Big Ten football, and they love it 11 a.m. kickoffs because then they get to go and go home and watch the evening slate of games. But I'm excited to see a sold out atmosphere in the middle of the day. I think it's going to be loud. People are going to be energetic because they just woke up. They're ready to go. And it's a weekend. And also, what else is there to do on a Saturday morning in Baton Rouge, especially on game day? I mean, am I wrong there?
No, you're definitely not. I mean, this is what is done on Saturdays in the fall, and really in most southern places, and particularly in Baton Rouge as well. And it's game day coming up. It's the first ranked game. I mean, this LSU's ranked for the first time in the season. I mean, they were ranked going into the year last year, lost to UCLA, and then did not get back in the polls. This is their first ranked game since 2020 in Tiger Stadium. That's a reason to get out there and show up and watch what, like you said, might end up being a pretty close game because of the way these teams match up. We'll have all the coverage for you over at theadvocate.com, NOLA.com. Please subscribe both to our daily newsletter where you get all the LSU headlines in your inbox in the morning. Join us here every Wednesday for our LSU discussions. Make sure, move forward, drop some comments in there, ask us any questions you'd like. We'll try to get to those. And then, of course, you can find us on social media, but also subscribe to The Advocate and NOLA.com. We'll have all your LSU coverage, football, baseball. Leah's got to head out to opening day of baseball tomorrow. So, always it's always something all the time, and we'll have you covered on all of it. So thanks for watching, everybody. This has been The Advocate LSU Sports Update for Leah and everybody else over at The Advocate. I'm Wilson Alexander. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.